Hi, welcome everyone. This module, Module 2, Unit 2, is focused on focus group methodology, and this will be an introduction to the use of focus groups as a method in your qualitative research. The unit that follows this focuses more on the tips and tricks of focus group moderators, which is also very important to understand in this method. So when we think about focus groups, one of the easiest ways to even describe focus groups is that they are focused group discussions. So they are discussions with a number of people, usually 6 to 8, 5 to 9, a smaller number of people who can engage in a group discussion. And these carefully planned series of discussions are designed to obtain perceptions on a particular defined area of interest or experiences or knowledge. And the idea is to use a non-threatening environment where people can comfortably talk in their own language. So a focus group discussion is an interactive, and we're going to focus on interactive discussion among a focus group moderator, the person who is running the focus group, and the participants. And it's focused around a particular topic, and it's guided by a set of questions. So when you're doing a focus group, you develop a focus group guide, which is the steps that you'll follow in the focus group and the questions and the probes that will be asked. And some focus groups can be more rigid, more structured than others, but typically you want questions and probes that allow for a natural conversation to evolve. On the focus group guide, the questions should be simple. They should be thought-provoking. So the easiest way to think about this is asking exploratory questions like how, and asking, can you tell me more about that? Can you tell me a story? These more thought-provoking rather than, of course, yes/no questions, which wouldn't elicit a dialogue. We'll talk about developing a focus group guide, but the questions should flow simple to complex as you're inviting people into having a conversation. So when we think about focus group methods, the steps that we think about in a focus group is to really define the purpose. Why would you be using focus groups for this method? And this takes us back to some earlier units about what is your worldview, what is your paradigmatic lens, what is your epistemological stance on this research. Why would focus groups be a good method to produce data, to produce evidence, to produce insight, to answer a particular research question? So why focus groups? After you define the purpose, often we're trying to get at common knowledge or norms or perceptions among a group of people. Focus groups can be really good for that comfortable discourse on a topic. That you then develop a focus group guide, so a structured set of questions. Now you want them structured so that the dialogue that's produces the data that will answer your research question, but you want it flexible enough so people feel comfortable. And then you would identify a focus group moderator. When I do focus groups, I have a moderator and an assistant moderator, and it's very important that these researchers have shared experiences with the participants who are engaging in the focus group. So we just did focus groups with people who identify as sexual gender minorities, and we made sure that the moderator came from this community, had the same similar experiences of this community. Now that's because we were interested in this particular group's experiences. If we were going to do a focus group with mothers, we would say the moderator probably should be a mother, have that common experience. You then recruit selected participants. Who would you want to participate and why? Like what stakeholder type would you want to participate in your focus group and why? And recruit them to participate. You then plan and manage all of the logistics in a research context. People who participate in a focus group are usually compensated about $50 for an hour and a half. And then depending on your epistemological approach to your research study, you would typically conduct the focus groups until you reach saturation, so until you have a solid understanding of the phenomena of interest that you're trying to explore through the focus group. So when you write a grant proposal, you fill out your institutional review board application, you say, I'm planning on conducting 6 focus groups. Maybe you'll reach saturation at 5, maybe you'll reach saturation at 12. So, and again, in qualitative, your research design is flexible in that way, and that's important. You then produce the data, and you move into the process of analyzing and interpreting the data. So typically, and best practice is that you have audio recorded that focus group, and that audio file gets transcribed into textual data, and the textual data is analyzed. We now have qualitative data analysis software that allows us to both analyze audio and textual. So in some cases, that audio file might be better for you to analyze than textual, and we'll speak to that in the modules on data analysis. And then you would report the results. Now, in these qualitative modules, we emphasize the dissemination of our findings. In academia, it's important for us to disseminate our findings in the form of an academic manuscript or presenting at a national conference, but in qualitative methods, particularly those that are community engaged, we want to make sure we have dissemination outputs that are friendly to the kinds of people who participated in your focus group. So sometimes that's a town hall meeting or a report or other kinds of novel ways of sharing those findings back. In our qualitative data analysis modules, you'll hear a lot about member checking, which is to go back to the stakeholder group from whom you took the data and check the degree of trustworthiness of your data. So before you disseminate those findings, it's important for you to validate how trustworthy the findings are from the community from which you took the data. So some strengths and limitations to focus groups. Some strengths are focus groups can produce concentrated amounts of data on a topic of interest. It can be an efficient way using groups of people as the unit of analysis. And the data emerges from group discussion. So the discourse that emerges is the discussion, not exactly what each individual participant said. So these responses to the opinions of others, the way in which people interact with each other can be very telling, can be very informative. The limitations is that the moderator can influence the group's interactions and observations. So this isn't really a naturalistic environment, and so the ways in which the moderator can set the stage for the research can influence the data in ways that may not be useful to your research question. And the group can influence the data you get. So you have to think a lot about who is in the room, whether the people in the room all have too similar of a experience so that you'll hear all the same things, or whether they have very different experiences, and then you'll hear a lot of polarization among the group, and that isn't very helpful at getting at this shared understanding of a phenomenon. So I want to talk about the tool development for focus groups. So in qualitative research, you often develop a tool and instrument to help you produce the data. In focus group research, that is a focus group guide. So we tend to think of a focus group guide as having a small number of questions, 5 to 7. You often see focus group guides with 20. That's just more like a survey or more like a structured interview than a focus group, because you have to make the space for discourse, dialogue, pausing, reacting. So you usually have 5 to 7 questions or so, and then these probes. So you'd ask a question, and then the probes move the conversation in a direction that is useful to you. A focus group guide starts with an introduction, a soft, kind of simple introduction question, and kind of moves the group to these key questions. And so you really want to attend to having a strong introduction and conclusion, because that can kind of determine the quality of your data, and we'll talk more about that. So when we think about question types by order in our focus group guide, initial simple questions can be really helpful, questions that people are able to answer without much concern. So can you tell me about a particular phenomena? What happened there? How do people stay healthy in your community? What are some challenges to staying healthy? When did you first experience this? Could you describe the events that led to? So these are all questions that people should be easily able to step into. what we can find in a focus group is that the reluctance to engage in the group discourse can impact the quality of the data. So you want an easy on-ramp question. And then you move on to intermediate questions. So these are where the harder questions can be asked. So what are your thoughts and feelings about that? Can you describe a typical day when this happened? What, if anything else, would you want us to know about this? So this is kind of moving to a deeper kind of discourse, or deeper kind of ramp, or a ramp to a deeper kind of insight. And then you'll move on to more complicated questions. And this is pretty intuitive, but you want to avoid questions that don't allow people to step into or are off-putting. So of course, yes, no questions, but even complicated constructs that you ask about, asking about trust, asking about culture. Everyone has different interpretations of what that means. When we do community-based participatory research, we spend a ton of time on these questions because often a question that's very clear to me what it means something very different to the residents that I'm inviting into a focus group. So a few things on focus group technique. You want to think a lot about the technique of producing the data in a focus group discussion. And there's three things that I think are important to think about. First, setting the stage for the focus group, making sure you're creating a space in which people want to engage. Second is really understanding how people interact in a group and how to facilitate that group interaction towards the production of high quality data. And last is, while you want to be flexible and you want people to be comfortable and provide it as natural setting as possible, you also want to control. This is kind of like a group interview, and you want to control it to go in the direction that suits your research. So in terms of setting the stage, in some cases, these are very concrete logistical issues in setting the stage. When you have a focus group of 6 to 8 people, 5 to 9 people, you're sitting around a circle, and the moderator it should not be at the head of the table, but should be somewhere comfortable. And the moderator should be able to see everybody in the room. So thinking about the height at which people are seating, is there any opportunity for someone to not be seen? Is the table big enough that you can look around the whole table? And you want to minimize distractions. So this is obvious, but a really common problem is that you've invited people into a focus group. It lasts 90 minutes, but they're attached to their phones. So something to do with their phones is actually very important. What we've typically done, particularly with young people, is we might put a basket on the table and say, okay, so we're going to be talking for an hour and a half. Just turn your phone off. Put it in the basket in front of the table, and when we're done, you can get it back. And then people don't have the urge to reach it and check their phone. We always remind people how long the focus group will be, and we stick to that time. So we don't want to hold people longer than we said we would. And the other important piece about setting the stage is thinking about being respectful and asking permission at every stage of the focus group. And this both sets the tone for what you want and the expectations of the participants. So when we turn on the recorder, we ask, so we're going to turn on the recorder, is that okay? We've, of course, consented people, and they know they're going to be recorded. If we have someone taking notes, there's going to be someone taking notes here. Her name is Jennifer, and she is that okay that she's taking notes here? And we emphasize confidentiality at every point of the focus group. So focus group rules that we typically follow. In a focus group, there are no right or wrong answers. So we want to emphasize that everyone's going to be sharing different ideas. It would be rare if everyone agreed. And so you don't have to agree with people, but you do have to be respectful. And that said, if you have a different opinion, we still want you to be honest and share with us your opinion. We remind people that we want to hear from everybody. In any group, there is one loud talker or one over talker, and so we often have to emphasize throughout the focus group, I just want to make sure I hear from everyone. We want to give everyone the opportunity to speak. And this might involve kind of stopping the overtalker and saying, we've really heard a lot from you. We're going to want to make sure I hear from everyone else. We also respect people's confidentiality, so that's really hard when you're in a group discussion and you're seeing and talking to people. You already have lost your risk to privacy has already been violated. And so we say, you know, what happens in here stays in here. It's important not to repeat anything outside of here. And then, as I said, we record focus groups so that we can produce textual data from them or to analyze the data in audio form. So we remind the group that we will be recording the discussion and make sure we get everyone's permission. So like an interview, and that we had a module on the interview, there's the importance of interaction. So this is the second kind of key thing to a focus group. So our goal is to get high quality, relevant responses to our questions, because the responses to our questions are the data that we're using to answer our research question. And the best way to get high quality, rich textual data is to build trust and rapport with the group to the best ability that you can, to reinforce the kinds of answers that we want, not that there's a right answer, but the kind of answers, and then to sustain engagement. So throughout the focus group, be gentle but structured so that you're moving the conversation along. Use the focus group guide, know it really well, but be flexible with it so that you can move from one question to the other. And a really good focus group moderator remembers and interprets things, and that's a really important means of sustaining engagement. An important thing to think about in a group discussion is the normal stages of any group discussion. And so I think about when I'm teaching or when I'm attending a meeting, these rules kind of apply to any kind of group discussion. So we think about when people enter into a discussion, there's an initial apprehension, not being sure whether they want to participate, they don't know what kinds of questions are going to be asked or what this is all about, probably have some distrust or generalized apprehension about research in general. And so often you'll have a focus group moderator start out the focus group with a question, and as I like to say, you hear cricket, cricket, and no one's participating. Typically what happens then is you'll have one brave person kind of start exploring what it would be like if they participate, so they move into the exploration stage. They're testing what they can share. And depending on how well the moderator handles that exploration, that determines kind of how well the focus group is going to go. So when the focus group participant answers the moderator's question, and the moderator says, thank you so much for that contribution. That's really a valuable insight. Is there anyone else who would like to join in? That moderator is inviting a conversation that is friendly and warm and filled with trust. So a normal stage of a group discussion then moves from exploration to cooperation. This is where sharing increases, and the discussion should be among the participants, not the moderator to participant, but it's a group discussion among the participants, and the moderator can start asking harder questions. And so you move up to kind of full participation. So I find that very helpful in thinking about focus group moderation. And the moderator, and again, the next module has more guidelines on this, but the moderator has to then control the discourse, use effective probes to produce the high quality data. So in some cases, effective probes that moderators can use to control the conversation are actually a silent probe. So just waiting for people to answer, nodding, or saying, okay. They can also add more details probes. Can you tell me more about that? Can you explain that? Can you tell me something else about that? And a moderator also can use what we call an echo probe. So that's, so this is what I hear. Is that right? Is this what you mean by that? That can also be risky if the moderator hasn't been listening very well and they echo something that hasn't been said. So that is a little bit of a risky probe, but when the moderator shares back, yes, that's what the participants were saying, that can be very rapport building. Some common challenges in focus group research is the cricket, people having a hard time getting moving or just kind of unsure what the moderator wants out of them. This can be because sometimes we hold focus groups on very complicated topics like racism, and people are unsure how to participate, or there might be concepts or constructs that are very are hard to talk about, are just very complicated. So reiterating the purpose of the focus group, why are we providing this opportunity for your voice to be heard? The other big challenge are these over-talkers and non-participants. So every focus group has an over-talker and a non-participant, and the moderator needs to figure out how to balance that out so that everyone participates. The last most common challenge is the conversation going off track or off ramp. Happens in every focus group, and it's the moderator's job to get it back on. One of the things we do about silence when we hear the cricket is trying to kind of echo, this is what I've heard so far, is that right? Sometimes that will get people moving. Reiterating the value of their opinion. I haven't heard very much from you over there, or we haven't heard from half of the group. And it's really important that we get this right, because we really want to understand the story in your own words. For participants who are not interested in participating, that happens all the time. Also, we just emphasize the anonymous nature of this. Your name will not be used, your voice will not be played anywhere, and emphasize the kind of the low bar of participating. So there's a variety of opinions, of stories on this. There are no right or wrong answers. And if we have to, we can call people out and be able to say things like, Martha, we haven't really heard from you. You've been very quiet. We really want for you to participate. So sometimes we actually have to call people out. So in starting to conclude, one of the most important things in a focus group is actually the conclusion. What we find in focus groups is when the moderator thanks people for their participation and says, okay, we're going to turn off the recorders now, what tends to happen is somehow that gives people permission to start talking. So I've learned to not end abruptly, to say, so we're going to be wrapping up now, so now I'm going to be turning off the recorders, or anything else to add. And sometimes this few minutes of conversation that can happen can really be the best kinds of data. So not concluding abruptly is really important. In some cases, people are relieved that the focus group is over, and then they really feel like they can talk then. If it turns out that you've turned off the focus group recorder and then people start talking, I ask permission. Do you mind if I write this down? This is really useful information, and that still becomes data. It's just in a different form, in a written form. So focus groups are a lot of work. Group dynamics are really complicated. They can be hard to manage. The moderator has to really be on their feet. And so practice knowing the focus group guide, preparing. We do a lot of mock focus groups until we do our first one is really important. Moderators should be curious, should show interest, they should have empathy, they should know and care about the research question a lot. They emphasize that they're not an expert and they shouldn't participate. They really are the facilitator of learning. And so we take moderator training very seriously because they are the instrument of data collection along with the focus group guide, and you want a moderator who is positioned with respect to the research in kind of just the right way to produce the high quality textual data. So the next module is going to talk about focus group moderators as the gatekeepers to the data really, and gatekeeping in the conversation. And I welcome you to that module to learn more about this. Thank you.